crossing the road just outside of town. The employee described it as looking like a massive dog, but said that it ran on 2 legs, not 4.
It already looked massive, but this thing must have been 7 foot plus.
That is giant.
Stories of mysterious creatures like Bigfoot are still being reported even today. But hidden deep within the forests of northern Michigan lies another legend that far fewer people have heard of. One that may be even more unsettling: the Michigan Dogman. If you enjoy real mystery stories like this, consider subscribing, because what comes next only gets more intense. If you map out sightings over the past century, something strange appears. Reports, marked like red dots, are heavily concentrated across the northwestern part of Michigan's Lower Peninsula. And these encounters don't just belong to modern times. They stretch all the way back to 1887, long before the well-known 1987 track by DJ Steve Cook that many assume started the legend. But what truly confuses researchers isn't just how the creature looks. It's a single detail that keeps repeating across countless reports: the way it moves. Not like a wolf, not quite like a human either. Long before America was even formed, something like this was already said to exist in those woods. Generations of Anishinaabe people passed down stories of a presence in the forest, something elders warned their children about. If you ever sensed it, you were told to stay away. They didn't simply describe it as a large animal, though it was massive. They didn't call it just a predator, even though it had the teeth and claws of a wolf. Instead, they focused on one detail that left listeners deeply unsettled. It didn't move the way it should. Its body had all the features of a powerful wolf: an elongated snout, heavy jaws, thick fur, and clawed limbs. But its movement broke every expectation. It stood upright. It walked on 2 legs with a steady, controlled rhythm. Balanced, deliberate, almost human. Not like a bear awkwardly rising for a better view. This was different. And when it paused, which it did often, it didn't behave like an animal. It stopped the way a person does, still, observing, thinking, deciding. Witnesses in these oral traditions emphasize something even more chilling: its eyes. They didn't dart away like those of a wild creature. They held contact, direct, unwavering. It didn't trigger panic the way animals usually do when they lock eyes with humans. Instead, it watched with a strange awareness, as if it understood that it was being watched in return. Elders taught that this was the most dangerous sign: not aggression, not a threat display, but that eerie calmness, that sense of thought behind its actions. A normal animal reacts in simple ways. It either attacks or retreats. But this being did something else entirely. It seemed to weigh its options, and then, on its own terms, it would choose to step back into the forest, leaving the witness frozen in place, too shaken to move. This wasn't the Wendigo, a completely different entity tied to winter, hunger, and starvation within Anishinaabe belief. This creature belonged to the physical world, the same forests as wolves and bears, and yet it didn't follow the rules of any known species. Indigenous communities didn't describe it as a monster. Instead, they used names that translated closer to the one that walks like a person, or the thing in the woods that shouldn't be there. Their stories didn't feel like myths meant to scare children. They felt like warnings, instructions, something real to recognize and avoid. Then, in 1887, 2 lumber workers in Wexford County walked into those same woods and came back with a story that echoed those ancient accounts almost perfectly. They had no knowledge of Anishinaabe traditions. They were immigrant laborers, focused on work, not folklore. And yet, they described what they saw in striking detail. A creature nearly 2 meters tall, shaped like a wolf, standing upright on its hind legs, watching them silently for nearly half a minute before calmly turning away and disappearing into the trees without a single sign of aggression. One of the men later shared something unsettling with a local reporter. He said the most terrifying part wasn't how big the creature was. It was the way it looked at them. Its stare felt human, like the moment one person studies another before deciding whether to speak. That account was printed in a small local newspaper and then forgotten. For nearly a century, it sat untouched in archives, unnoticed. What makes this even stranger is this: two completely separate groups of people, living generations apart, with no connection between them, described the same entity in nearly identical ways, a creature with the body of a predator, but the awareness, the thought process, of something far more intelligent. As logging camps spread across northern Michigan, stories began to circulate, especially around campfires. Not everything was written down. Some things were only spoken quietly when the night grew too long. After 1860, northern Michigan transformed into one of the largest logging hubs in North America. Vast white pine forests, trees that had stood for centuries before Columbus ever arrived, were cleared with relentless efficiency. The scale of destruction reshaped the land more dramatically than anything since the glaciers had retreated. Scattered across this wilderness, logging camps emerged, small, rough settlements surrounded by endless forest. Tens of thousands of workers, many from Scandinavia, Germany and eastern Canada, were sent into these remote regions, places they had never seen before, often not even marked clearly on maps. They lived cut off from the world. No electricity, no steady communication. Supplies arrived only once every couple of weeks by wagon. For months at a time, these men existed in isolation. In that environment, storytelling became essential. During long winter nights, sometimes stretching to 16 hours of darkness, men filled the silence with tales, ghost stories, exaggerated adventures, and sometimes accounts that didn't feel like fiction at all. The folklore of these lumber camps is vast, and much of it remains unexplored. But the 1887 Wexford encounter wasn't an isolated case. It was just one written fragment of a much larger pattern. Among the workers, there were repeated whispers of something moving through the forest, not like an animal, but like a man. In 1937, a small newspaper in Paris, Michigan, documented a farmer's experience. At dusk, he saw a figure standing at the edge of his oat field. In 1961, two hunters near Big Rapids described a nearly 2-meter-tall creature walking upright through an open stretch of woods. In 1967, campers in Manistee County reported something watching them from across a creek, standing motionless for several minutes before quietly turning away. In every case, witnesses focused on the same disturbing detail. Their fear didn't come from seeing a large animal. It came from the feeling that the creature was observing them, analyzing them in a way no animal should be capable of. For decades, these reports remained scattered, buried in old newspapers, tucked between obituaries and farm equipment ads. No one collected them. No one connected the dots. Major cities ignored them. Academic institutions showed no interest. A century's worth of accounts sat quietly, waiting. The real mystery isn't that these stories were hidden. It's that no one thought they were important enough to investigate. Then, in 1987, something unexpected happened. A radio DJ named Steve Cook, working at WTCM-FM in Traverse City, decided to play a harmless prank. Inspired by old forest tales and the 1887 Wexford story, he wrote a country song called The Legend. It was meant to be an April Fool's joke, something fun that would get a few laughs and quickly fade away. But it didn't. As soon as the song aired, the station's phones lit up. Listeners from Cadillac, Luddington, and Manistee began calling in, not just to request the song again, but because it had stirred something. Within weeks, it became one of the most requested tracks the station had ever played. Cassette copies started appearing in local shops, and then the letters began arriving. These weren't prank responses. They weren't fan mail. They were personal accounts, handwritten, often anonymous, many describing encounters that had been kept secret for decades. One farmer from Lake County wrote about seeing a figure standing at the edge of his field back in 1968. He remembered every detail, the exact position of a fence post, the direction of the wind, because he had stood frozen for 16 minutes, too afraid to move. A truck driver recalled an incident from 1975. Driving along M37 at 3 a.m., his headlights caught something crossing the road. It stopped in the middle, turned its head to look directly at him, then calmly continued into the trees. Another hunter described an encounter in 1981 near Père Marquette. He saw something standing in a clearing, slowly turning its head to track him as he tried to back away unnoticed. Steve Cook kept every one of those letters. He didn't publish them. He didn't try to profit from them. He simply stored them in a filing cabinet at the station. And over the next 4 decades, that collection quietly grew. While most of the country remained completely unaware, very few ever thought to dig deeper. After all, who would investigate a mystery that started as an April Fool's joke? When people eventually reached out to Cook, he revealed only a fraction of what he had collected. Many of those who wrote to him had one condition: their identities had to remain hidden. What that radio song truly did wasn't invent the legend. It did something far more unexpected. It created a destination. For decades, people across northern Michigan had encountered something they couldn't explain, but they stayed silent. There was no language for it, no place to report it, no shared understanding. Then suddenly, after the song aired, everything changed. The phenomenon had a name, and more importantly, it had somewhere to go. So they began writing. The common narrative suggests the legend came first, and the witnesses followed. But that flips the truth completely. The encounters were already happening. The song simply gave them a way to surface. It didn't create the stories. It released them. By the 1990s, independent researchers, some even working alongside local law enforcement, started plotting these encounters on a map. Using GPS coordinates where possible, or estimated locations when necessary, they began building a visual record. They drew from multiple sources: Cook's private archive of letters, informal reports from Forest Patrol officers, and later, online witness accounts. And then a pattern began to form. After 2000, the map revealed something impossible to ignore. The sightings didn't cluster around major cities like Detroit or Grand Rapids. They didn't center around Traverse City either, the very place where the song originated, where you would expect the highest concentration if this was simply a media-driven phenomenon. Instead, the reports formed a dense, continuous corridor stretching across counties like Manistee, Wexford, Benzie, Leelanau, Antrim, Kalkaska, Missaukee, Lake, Mason, Oceana, and Newaygo. At the heart of this zone lies the Manistee River Basin and the vast expanse of the Huron-Manistee National Forest. This region is one of the most remote in Michigan's Lower Peninsula. It has fewer people, fewer roads, and miles upon miles of uninterrupted wilderness. The Manistee National Forest alone spans over 540,000 acres. The Pere Marquette State Forest adds another massive stretch. And within the same region, Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore protects miles of untouched shoreline along Lake Michigan. Together, this creates one of the largest continuous forest landscapes in the eastern United States. And that's where the reports are most concentrated. This directly contradicts the idea of a media-created myth. If the sightings were driven by the song, they should have been most common where the signal was strongest, where people talked about it the most, where tourists bought merchandise tied to the legend. But that's not what the data shows. The highest density of encounters appears in places most people never go, along isolated sections of the Manistee River, deep within unnamed forest roads that don't even appear on standard GPS systems, in swampy terrain where the nearest house might be 8 kilometers away. This isn't how a rumor spreads, it's how territory appears. The pattern mirrors the kind of distribution wildlife experts use to track real animals, like black bears, wolves, or even Canada lynx. Defined regions, natural boundaries, consistent presence. The researchers behind these maps were cautious in their conclusions. They didn't claim the creature was real. Instead, they made a more precise observation. The reports are real, and the way those reports are distributed resembles the behavior of a territorial species, not the spread of a story. That distinction might seem subtle, but it challenges one of the most common explanations entirely. Then came something that would blur the line even further. In the late 2000s, a piece of footage began circulating online. It was said to be recorded in 1971 on 8mm film somewhere in the Michigan wilderness. The clip was short but disturbing. It showed a large, dark figure moving on all fours through an open clearing. Then suddenly, it rose onto 2 legs and charged directly toward the camera. The footage cut out as the camera dropped. It became known as the Gable film, and almost overnight, it spread everywhere. Within the cryptozoology community, it sparked intense debate. Analysts dissected it frame by frame, trying to determine whether it captured something real or something carefully staged. The footage spread fast. TV shows referenced it, and YouTube videos with millions of views placed it alongside famous Bigfoot clips. For a few years, the Gable film became one of the most debated pieces of cryptid evidence in North America. Then, in 2010, Steve Cook revealed the truth. It was staged. He and Micah Grusa had created it as an experiment to show how easily people believe unclear footage with no real proof behind it. For many, that ended the story. If the same man behind the song also faked the video, then the entire legend must be false. But it's not that simple. Cook's letters started arriving in 1987, long before the film. The Wexford sighting dates back to 1887. Indigenous stories go back even further. Police reports from the 1970s existed independently. One fake video doesn't erase decades, centuries of accounts. Cook proved a hoax was possible. He never proved every witness was lying. Researchers like Linda Godfrey understood this. After years of investigation, she treated these reports seriously, regardless of the final explanation. And across hundreds of accounts, one pattern stands out. People weren't afraid because they saw a large animal. Northern Michigan already has bears, coyotes, deer, and even lynx. Locals know these animals well. What truly terrified them was something else. It didn't move like an animal. Witnesses consistently described a creature walking on 2 legs with a steady, controlled stride, not like a bear standing briefly upright. It would stop, watch, and seem to think before acting. That's what broke them. Not the size, not the teeth, but the feeling that they weren't just being seen. They were being studied. A wolf's head, wolf jaws, thick fur, a predator's body in every sense, yet moving with the balance and awareness of a human. That's what made it feel wrong. Psychologists call it the uncanny response, the moment something looks almost familiar, but not quite, and the brain can't place it. A bear is clearly a bear, a human is clearly human. But this doesn't fit anywhere. And when the mind can't categorize something, it reacts with fear. That's what these witnesses experienced and what they struggled to describe. They didn't stay silent because of the legend. The legend came later. The fear came first. Today, the number of sightings is rising again, higher than it's been in decades. Part of that is easy to explain. Trail cameras are everywhere. Smartphones are always ready. More people have been exploring forests since the pandemic, flooding places like Manistee, Pere Marquette, and Sleeping Bear Dunes. More eyes in the woods means more chances to see something unusual. But there's more happening. Wildlife is expanding. Bears are moving south. Coy wolves are spreading in unpredictable ways. And at the same time, people are leaving rural areas. Farms are being abandoned. Roads are fading. Forests are reclaiming land. The line between human space and wilderness is shifting. And the wilderness is winning. Each year, thousands of acres return to forest. Each year, more space opens up where something could exist unnoticed. Officially, nothing unknown lives there. That's the stance of the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, and it hasn't changed. Researchers don't directly challenge that. They simply document the reports, and after everything is considered, hoaxes, misidentifications, media influence, three possibilities remain. First, this could be a psychological pattern. Independent but similar experiences shaped by culture and perception. Second, it could be a real, undiscovered animal, though surviving unseen for over a century would be extremely difficult. Or third, something that doesn't fit either explanation, something we don't yet understand. The map doesn't decide between them, it just keeps growing. New reports appear every month. Different people, different places, same detail. It didn't move like an animal. From the 1887 Wexford sighting, to decades-old letters, to reports still being filed today, the pattern hasn't changed. The forests of northern Michigan still hold their silence. The witnesses keep speaking. And after more than 130 years, the question remains exactly where it began. What was it that looked at them, paused, and then turned, and walked back into the trees?